Wally West versus the World, or at least the Bats, by Evermoon 2097. A Batman All Media Types fanfic, rated for teen and up audiences. With additional tags for, yes, it's a Scott Pilgrim reference. Dick Grayson loves Wally West. Wally West loves Dick Grayson. Romani Dick Grayson. Crack treated seriously. Angst. Fluff. Hurt comfort. Not canon compliant. Canon typical violence. Bisexual disaster Wally West. Brief mentions of Dick's mini traumas. Short Wally West. Man gives off short energy. No beta, we die like Jason Todd. And Wally West. This went from a series of shovel talks to a series of tests. To those tests reflecting various traumas of the characters. To a kind of introspective on Wally's place in the fandom as tangent to Dick. Girl, I don't know either. Complete. Summary. I think your siblings are gonna kill me. Dick frowned, glancing at his phone on the coffee table. Does that have anything to do with why Jason said you're meeting him at Gotham Harbor today? Wally paled. Of course he's first. He looked down at his boyfriend. First? Walls, what's going on? Jason said it's time for trial by sibling? Dick stilled. Shit. Damn it. I was really hoping they gave up on that. Continuation of my last bird flash fic. Can probably be read standalone with no issue, but it's linked here, in case you want to check it out. Set after Duke's introduction to the family. This is a mix of crack, character analysis, bird flash, bat fam, and feels. TM. That ends like all good comedies. A proposal. Featuring plenty of Wally West trying to earn the approval of the rest of the Bats. Don't worry, none of them know how to be haters if it kicked them in the face. Much more fluff than its angstier prequel, but also not devoid of angst. FYI. Chapter 1. Bruce. 1 year earlier. Dick savored the feeling of the Nightwing suit beneath his fingers. How long had it been since he had gotten to wear it? 2, 3 months? He didn't have a lot of opportunities, what with being stuck as Batman most of the time. He glanced up as footsteps echoed through the Batcave. Batman rounded the corner, pausing when he saw Dick. Hey! Dick shoved the suit into the duffel bag he was packing, standing up quickly. Sorry, I've got to get going. Catch up soon, right? He ducked around Bruce's arm, the bandage around his father's shoulder stopping him from fully reaching out. Dick swallowed as he walked out of the cave. Part of him felt bad for ignoring Bruce. He had just returned from his trip through time, and had amnesia on top of it. But... Dick, wait. Bruce's footsteps were fast behind him. Sorry, B, gotta rush. Haven't seen Bloodhaven in a while. You know how it is. His voice dripped of false cheer. He barely stifled a flinch as Bruce's hand clamped on his shoulder. Dick, I want to talk to you, he said firmly. The man let out a sigh through his nose. So much for later. Fine, what do you want, B? Dick asked, suddenly too tired to pretend to be friendly. He turned around, keeping his face neutral as he made eye contact. Bruce's ear twitched, but that was his only sign of surprise. Why are you in such a rush? I've barely seen you since I returned. It's been a long year. I want to go back home, B. Something flashed across B's face, but Dick didn't have the bandwidth to even try to decipher it. Home, Bruce repeated, after a beat. With Wallace. Dick's stomach tightened at the mention of his redhead, not liking Bruce's tone. Yeah, with Wally, my boyfriend. He's waiting. Got a problem? He made sure to keep his voice down, knowing how sounds echo in the cave. If Wally heard him yelling now, well, Dick didn't want to put it past Wally to punch an amnesiac. He was protective like that. Bruce sighed, his hand leaving Dick's shoulder to pinch his nose. Let's not fight, Dick. I just wanted to talk about how you handled things. Save it, B. Dick interrupted, hackles raised. Of fucking course, Bruce just had to try and get one last lecture in. about his precious legacy. Too bad Dick wasn't in the goddamn mood. Frankly, I don't care. I did my best as Batman, okay? Sorry if it wasn't good enough. Bruce visibly startled. When he spoke again, his voice was hard. I just meant... echoed across the cave. This time, it wasn't Dick who interrupted. Alfred was standing at the foot of the stairs up to the manor, brow furrowed disapprovingly. Alfred. Bruce's eyes flashed with exasperation. I told you I wanted to handle this on my own. And you clearly cannot. Alfred tutted, then turned to Dick, smiling kindly and pressing a box of what looked like lasagna into his hands. Master Dick, if you'll stay just a moment, I do believe you'll want to hear what he has to say. After he rephrases. He shot a pointed look at Bruce, who paled slightly. Of course, if you wish to join Master Wally, we won't keep you. Dick flicked his eyes between the two. Bruce's brow was furrowed, his eyes drifting down as he seemed to actually contemplate his next words. Alfred was still smiling. I've got a bit of time, Dick found himself answering, anger dissipating. Alfred seemed to know what this was about, at least. As much slack as the butler gave Bruce, he wouldn't lie to Dick on his behalf. To any of the family, really. Bruce looked up, looking prepared. You shouldn't have... Alfred cleared his throat, eyes flashing over to Bruce. Dick almost found it funny how off-balanced it seemed to throw Bruce. You were never meant... He tried again. Alfred seemed scandalized. Master Bruce, are you trying to put your own foot in your mouth? Maybe Alfie should just say it at this point, if he knows what you're trying to say. Dick mused, adopting his own slight smile. Bruce's eyebrows tilted up, a hopeful gleam appearing as he looked at the butler, only to wilt at the man's piercing glare. Once more, Bruce cleared his throat, his shoulders dropping slightly. He's right, Dick, son. He began slowly, only continuing at Alfred's nod. You are so much bigger than the cowl. Dick raised an eyebrow, eyeing Bruce's head. It was smaller than his? Sorry for stretching it out? He offered when Bruce did not continue. That seemed to snap Bruce out of his thoughts. Not that, Dick. I wasn't worried about you stretching out, Batman. He paused, seeming to struggle to find the right words. Alfred nodded encouragingly. I was worried you'd crush yourself to fit inside it. At the admission, Bruce seemed to slump, leaning against the fold-up table they'd left in the middle of the cave after one too many take-out work nights. Dick made a surprised sound, glancing at Alfred for confirmation that he wasn't going crazy. B? Bruce continued, now on a roll. You boys call Robin magic, right? Dick, in my eyes you have never lost that. Not as Robin, not as Nightwing. You, Dick Grayson, are able to do things I can only dream of. Were there tears in Bruce's eyes? Now it was Dick's turn to feel off balance. And I worried what being forced to take on the mantle would do to you. The last thing I want for you, for any of my children, is for you to be me. Batman was never made with you in mind. Bruce said the name like it was a curse. And I feared what you'd do to yourself to try and fill my role. I'm just relieved to have been wrong. That's all, son. Bruce said the last part with a fond smile, finally looking up to meet Dick's eyes. His mouth was dry. I can't take the credit, he found himself saying, unable to take his eyes off his dad. Never in 20 years of knowing him had Bruce ever been so open. Wallace? Bruce finally said, voice much softer than the first time he'd said the man's name. Dick's cheeks turned pink, blue eyes turning towards the exit to the garage. Yeah, Wally, I think he was also worried about the mantle. He was even stricter than Alfie about no capes upstairs thing. Dick interrupted himself, laughing a little at the memory. Even ripped the bat suit off me, once or twice, before letting me work at the computer. Like he thought extra time in it was a bad idea. Maybe he was right, he admitted. He wouldn't lie. Being Batman had been awful. Not Damien, never Damien. His littlest brother might have started rough around the edges, but helping socialize him to their world and teaching him to accept love had been rewarding in ways Dick wouldn't ever have been able to explain. But if he'd had been able to do all of that without being in the shadow of Gotham, Bruce's eyes were still on him. His lips quirked upward as he studied Dick. You really care for him? Yeah. Dick unconsciously scratched the back of his neck, suddenly feeling like a teenager who had just been caught holding hands with his crush. And he cares for you. Bruce's words were thick with emotion, one that Dick hadn't heard very often. His face turned a few shades darker. Yeah, he does. More than makes sense, sometimes. He mumbled. Alfred was still there, seeming very amused at the exchange. I think it makes sense, Bruce said wistfully. I'm happy that you two found each other, and that you got him back. He's good for you. The last part came out like a whisper. Thanks, B. He really is. Dick knew he had a dopey smile on his face, one that he was sure Wally would have his phone background by the end of the week. Babs had a weakness for macarons that both of them took advantage of religiously. Bruce cleared his throat after a moment, standing up straighter, his usual formality sliding back into place, but his eyes still shone with emotion. You should get going. I am sure he's waiting. Yeah. Dick readjusted his bag, glancing between Bruce and Alfred. I'll be back this weekend. See how things are settling? His voice went up tentatively at the end. Both men exchanged smiles. Bring Wally, too. Tell him he's always welcome here. Warmth bloomed in his chest at the words. That was about as close to a he has my approval as you could get, especially from Bruce. I will. Thanks, B. He gave them both a quick hug, breathing in his father's warmth a little. It had been a year. The two men waved as he made his way towards the garage, Bruce still smiling softly. As Dick turned around the corner, he found Wally tiptoeing his way down the hall, clearly trying to escape silently. He let out a snicker as the speedster whirled around. How much did you hear? Wally's face went red, only a few shades lighter than his hair. All of it. Sorry, I heard Alfred shouting and got worried, but I'm glad it was nothing. Well, not nothing, but that it wasn't anything bad, and Dick cut him off, planting a kiss on his cheek as he slung his arm around the man's shoulders, leading him forward. His boyfriend laughed, arm sliding around Dick's waist and tugging him close. Come on, I'll drive. You deserve a good nap. I'll even swing by Noodle Street on our way, though you're paying. He groaned half-heartedly, but gave it up as he slumped into the passenger seat. Wally took his duffel, pressed a kiss to his face, before swinging it into the back seat. Dick let his head loll to the side as Wally climbed into the car with him. It rumbled to life, and then Wally's eyes were on him. Everything okay, Dickie? Couldn't be better, he said softly. And how could life be anything but when he had those beautiful green eyes looking at him, his own love and care reflected in their gaze? Wally smiled, one of his hands cupping Dick's face. And you say I'm a sap, he said, but there was no heat. I love you, Dick. I love you too, Wally. The words, as easy as breathing, still sent a thrill down his chest. Now drive, you promised me noodles, he joked after soaking in the moment for a beat. Wally's laugh was the best sound in the world. You got it in. One bowl of yakisoba coming up. Present day. Wally flopped dramatically across the couch, his stomach across Dick's thighs. He smiled softly while carding his hand through his boyfriend's hair. Wally mumbled something contentedly, relaxing. After a moment of silence, Wally shifted, dragging himself back down across the couch, so his head was sitting in Dick's lap now, facing upward. He was pouting. "You okay, babe?" Dick murmured, continuing to pet his adorable redhead. Wally leaned into the touch, but still looked grumpy. "I think your siblings are gonna kill me." Dick frowned, glancing at his phone on the coffee table. "Does this have anything to do with why Jason said you're meeting him at Gotham Harbor Friday?" Wally paled. "Of course he's first." He looked down at his boyfriend. "First? Walls, what's going on?" "Jason said it's time for trial by sibling." Dick's hand stilled. "Shit. Damn it. I was really hoping they gave up on that." Trial by sibling was a joke Dick had made when Jason first got a girlfriend, and amounted to making sure she was as much of a literature nerd as his little bro. Them Babs had made sure she was just as mean as Jason was sometimes. Suddenly, Dick was testing Steph's willingness to bully Tim into sleeping, and Babs was making sure she'd know how to brew a damn good cup of coffee. And then Tim had joined in when it came to test how much Dean paid attention to Steph. Not nearly enough. Somehow, by the time Tim had confessed to Con, the entire Bat Clan had decided it was their personal responsibility to test the worthiness of each partner. And the tradition had only gotten worse as the family grew larger. Dick would never forget the Kryptonian clone's horror when all he could hear was Cass's heartbeat chasing after him. And now it was Wally's turn. The man in his lap sat up to face Dick, frowning dramatically. "You knew this was coming?" "Babe, you've been in my life longer than literally all of them. I figured they'd give you a pass." Wally let out a sigh, laying his head on Dick's shoulder. He let himself be pulled closer. "I can see if I can talk them out of it," Dick offered, cautiously. Honestly, he wasn't sure if he could. Maybe Cass and Duke could be dissuaded. Tim, too. But no way was Jason or Steph giving up. Not without some serious blackmail. And he could forget about shaking Babs off. As for Damien, well, Dick would have to hope that his baby bat wouldn't stoop to tormenting Wally. Who was he kidding? His boyfriend was doomed. "You don't have anything to prove to them, Wally. I won't let them hurt you," Dick said, jokingly planting a kiss on his forehead. Wally frowned in contemplation, his fingers tapping sporadically across Dick's collarbone. After a beat, he responded, "No, it's okay." "Are you sure?" Dick examined his face, watching the conflict in the green eyes. Wally's mouth slanted as he mulled the possibilities over. He looked very kissable. Wally eventually smirked, glancing up at Dick's open staring. "Yeah, I'm sure." He raised his nose to meet Dick's. "If this is what it means to date a bat, then I'm all in. Can't have your family hating me." "They don't hate you," he argued, rubbing Wally's back. "My siblings love you." "Then I'll make them love me even more," he answered, determination in his voice. Wally watched Dick zone out for the 4th time that evening. Gaze fixed on Etana, the houseplant. He threw a piece of popcorn at him, watching the way it bounced down his collarbone. Dick blinked back to life, tilting his head at Wally. "She's gonna catch fire if you glare at her anymore. Come on, what's eating at you?" Dick frowned, and Wally shifted closer, letting his socked feet tap gently on Dick's thigh. "Sorry, I just can't figure out why they're doing this now. I know they were thinking about this when we first got together, but then B disappeared, so they dropped it. But he's been back for like a year now." Wally subtly shifted his gaze back to the TV, avoiding Dick's eyes. Maybe they were just waiting for Duke to settle? He lied, because he knew why Jason had suddenly decided it was time for the tests. "Maybe," Dick started. "But honestly, I could totally have seen Jay and Steph using it as a way to help Duke settle get him to feel accepted in the family through a silly tradition. But they would have done it closer to when he got adopted, then. Why now? Dick trailed off. The speedster snuggled closer, not offering any input of his own. Dick would probably see through any more lies. Better just be quietly comforting. Dick seemed lost in his thoughts suddenly. Anyway, Wally took the opportunity to admire his lover. The sallowness in Dick's features had finally faded, a byproduct of a year under the Batman's cowl. The shadow in his brow was no longer quite so deep, his eyes less calculating. They were a clear blue, still focused, but no longer weighed down by the weight of the world. Wally much preferred him like this. His gaze shifted down the acrobat's body, over the fluff of the hoodies and blankets the two were swamped in. Eventually, he ended up staring at Dick's hands, long and slender, rubbing tensely at the pillow's fringe. Idly, Wally slipped his hand into Dick's, his boyfriend clasping it automatically. And as Wally closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of the love of his life, he couldn't help but imagine the ring he'd tucked away at Aunt Iris's, sitting snug around his finger. Yeah, he could handle a few tests. Chapter 2. Jason. Wally bent forward, feeling the muscles in his back stretch. He let out a content breath. Over the sound of washing the dishes, he heard Dick whistle appreciatively. Stifling a snort, he shifted to his side, pulling his right foot backwards, ignoring his teasing boyfriend. Tonight was the night of Jason's test. Supposedly, it was just a simple drug raid, but Wally knew better than to let his guard down around the bats. Besides, it wasn't like he went out on the field all that often. Sure, he made sure to get used to the Speed Force again after his return. It had taken a few months, and more time shivering over the toilet than Wally cared to admit, but he'd gotten to the point where the pure energy flowing through his veins didn't feel so numbing. Uncle Barry had theorized that not only was Wally getting used to comfortably accessing the power that had once consumed him whole, but that he also could use more of it than ever before. It was like he was learning to use his super speed for the first time all over again. Except with trauma responses piled on, too. So fun. But he'd made sure to get the hang of it, especially when Bruce had disappeared and Dick was forced to don the cowl. The Bat family had unanimously agreed that Wally couldn't be a regular vigilante in Gotham, both because of Bruce's no-meta rule, but also because Gotham apparently didn't take too kindly to outsiders. Not even well-meaning flashes. That didn't stop him from having a suit prepared, and body ready, just in case any of the family had ever needed a super speedy extraction. Wally might not be part of the family, yet, but that didn't mean he was going to sit around while one of them got hurt. Since Bruce's return, he had even tagged along with Dick for patrols around Bloodhaven a few times, slowly reintegrating himself back into hero work. As exciting as working on his PhD was, and as much as he loved the quiet college life, he always knew the costume would drag him back one day. You don't just spend most of your childhood using heroics as your chosen form of escapism just to leave it behind. Outside the odd team-up in Bloodhaven, and that one time he super speed tackled Spoiler away from the Joker, Wally hadn't really worked with the Bat family much in the field. Dick claimed they were all more or less similar, all having trained under Batman. But Wally privately doubted that. Something told him that Jason wasn't going to be the type to drop puns mid-somersault kick. The sound of the sink shutting off behind him, and, after a beat, Wally felt his boyfriend join him on the floor. "Can I help you?" Wally raised a flirty eyebrow. "With stretching?" "Of course, I'm an acrobat," Dick smirked, ordering Wally onto his back, cold hands gripping his left leg, holding his right to the floor while lifting his knee to his chest. Dick leaned down, forcing Wally's leg further upward and kissing him lightly on the nose. There was a comfortable strain on his hamstring. "We still have a while before you have to meet Jay. What do you say we have some fun?" He leaned back, letting Wally switch his leg before repeating the motion. "Are you trying to exhaust me before a mission?" Wally asked, slightly incredulous, though not entirely opposed. Blue eyes sparkled playfully. "Get your mind out of the gutter, West. I meant watching a few episodes of the new Castlevania. Sure, he drawled, rolling his eyes. My bad, wherever did I get that idea? He said, sarcastically. His thighs twitched, both knees suddenly at his collarbone. Dick had balled him up, still pressing Wally against the floor. Dark eyes looked down at him, as if he wasn't pinning Wally to the floor. No clue. He felt his eyes go wide, ears warming. He gulped, then mustered up a glare, not even trying to break out of the weak hold. The love of his life stared cheekily back. Stupid hot Dick Grayson. Stupid flexible acrobat. Before he could continue his rapid, weakening protests, the sound of knuckles rapping against wood echoed through the apartment. Richard, it's almost time for us to depart. Dick lurched backwards, letting Wally's legs flop free on either side of him. The two exchanged identical, confused looks. They couldn't sit for long, however, because Damien's knock sounded again. I know you and West are home, Richard. Let me in, he demanded. His boyfriend sprang to his feet, quickly moving over to the door while Wally fanned himself, willing the blood away from his face. Did you forget you had plans? I don't think so, Dick called back, swinging the door open. Wally sat up too, poking his head around the corner to watch the exchange, and waved at the young boy across the threshold. Said boy scowled, fixing Wally with a glare. Oh well, that was improvement. Kinda. At least he didn't throw anything at him this time. After roughly a month of Dick being Batman, with Damien as his Robin, the kid had suddenly completely flipped his attitude, from being dismissive of his big brother to suddenly believing he could do no wrong. The 10-year-old had become rather possessive of Dick. It made sense. He hadn't exactly had many secure relationships before, given that most were prone to being fired and/or assassinated. But Dick was clearly the first person who had really taken the time and effort to connect with him. It wasn't a surprise that the kid was reluctant to share him, even if that meant that Wally was absolutely not to be tolerated in the slightest. It had taken almost a week to get Damien to stop throwing snakes at Wally, and even still, he clearly wasn't a fan of the speedster. But that was fine. Aside from the occasional attempted maiming, Damien was a really good kid, and had grown up a lot in the last 2 years. Wally knew Dick saw the boy more as a son than a brother. And who was Wally to get in the way of his lovable boyfriend's loving tendencies? If he had to work a little harder to earn the kid's tolerance, then that was fine by him. Though, now that he thought about it, these tests really were Damien's perfect chance to get rid of him, huh? Before Wally could lament his fate of probably having to wade through a pit of venomous snakes, the kid had started speaking. You promised to patrol with me tonight. Dick blanched. I did? Sorry, Damie, I really don't remember, He was interrupted as a chime sounded from his phone in the floor. Since he was closer, Wally picked it up, quickly reading the notification before turning it towards his boyfriend. It's in your calendar, babe, he said with a smirk. What? Dick asked, the alarm in his voice wiping the smile away. He walked over and grabbed his phone, quickly scanning the notification too. His eyes widened. Wally frowned. Dick wasn't normally forgetful about plans, especially not ones with Damien. He gently rubbed Dick's shoulder as his boyfriend read the text for the 3rd time, squinting suspiciously. Damien interrupted, clearly ignoring his brother's confusion. Should I assume you and West already had plans? Wally barely resisted the urge to raise an eyebrow at the kid. He didn't seem surprised that Dick had forgotten. Before Dick could respond, Wally turned to the boy, smiling gently. Nah, he's all yours. I have to meet Jay in Gotham tonight anyway. Damien's eyes narrowed as Dick's hand grabbed Wally's wrist. Wait, what? You have plenty of time, Walls. You don't have to leave now. He smiled, leaning in close. Murmuring under his breath, he said, I think he wants you to himself, Dickie. I'll be fine. He pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. I'll see you in the morning, okay, babe? Dick's eyes softened in understanding, but his mouth frowned hesitantly. Okay, yeah, I'll see you then. Wally grinned broadly, tilting his head to meet Damien's eyes. You'll take care of Dick tonight, right? Damien's scowl lacked some of the harshness it normally did. Better than you, he grumbled. Dick shook his head fondly, pecking Wally's lips as he slid past him towards the door. "Thank you for being okay with this," he whispered softly. He conveyed as much love as he could in his gaze as Wally pulled on his shoes. "Nothing to thank me for, Rob. Have fun, you two. I'll tell Jason you guys said hi." And, with that, Wally was out the door, ducking into an alley behind their building, before changing and speeding off through Bloodhaven. The skyline of Gotham loomed before him, still dark in the sunset, not yet dotted with yellow streetlights. It wasn't hard to find the building he and Jason were meant to be breaking into later, and Wally stopped on the rooftop a few blocks away just to be safe. He checked his phone. Dick wasn't wrong about him having time. Almost 90 minutes, before the deal took place. He debated patrolling around to kill time, but quickly decided against it. Gotham was still twitchy whenever he made an appearance, and he wouldn't want to draw unnecessary attention and scare the deal back underground. That would definitely count as failing. And so, Wally sat down in the shadow of the door leading to his roof, away from the edges as to not be seen from the street. He sent a quick text to Babs, vaguely accusing her of adding Damien's patrol to Dick's calendar. She responded a few minutes later. "I told him it was too obvious. I'll tell Dick what happened." Wally smirked, silently cheering that he was right. He knew Dick wouldn't be mad. It really was kind of cute that Damien had gone through the trouble of recruiting Babs just to orchestrate the whole thing. But it was also kind of sad. Has he not been spending enough time in Gotham? He thought. I know we've spent a lot of time in Blood, but not more than normal, right? Maybe he's still adjusting to Dick being away so much. Wally frowned, but was soon snapped out of his thoughts, as another figure joined him on the roof. A dark leather jacket waved lightly in the wind. Several guns strapped onto the man's thighs and back. A red helmet glared down at him, as Red Hood walked closer. "You know the deal's not for an hour, right?" A mechanized voice asked, exasperated. Wally grinned sheepishly. Robin wanted to spend time with N. Figured I'd head over early and give them some space. Jason grunted, dropping down in front of him. "Yeah, the demon brat's annoying like that." "I don't know. I mean, you know how he is with Rob. I think he misses him. I don't mind," Wally said with a shrug, relaxing against the wall. "Well, aren't you altruistic?" the anti-hero said gruffly. With a careful yank, Jason pulled off his helmet, setting it down beside him. Next, he unholstered the gun on his thigh, quickly checking its magazine, pointing the gun away from them all the while. Seemingly satisfied, Jason repeated the process with the gun on his calf. "So," Wally began, leaning in a little closer. "How you doin'?" he asked, trying to make conversation. Green-blue eyes flickered to him, a little bemused. "Fine, a little bored. Getting ready to put you through the ringer." "Yeah, about that. Do I get to know what you're testing me on?" Jason smirked. "Oh, don't worry. You'll figure it out pretty quick. No need to fret about it quite yet," he said, sinisterly. Wally rolled his eyes. "Drama queen," he muttered. The two settled into a silence, interrupted only by the clicking of Jason disassembling and reassembling his many, many guns. Wally had always liked the second Robin. Sure, he wasn't exactly the same boy he remembered mourning all those years ago, but he wasn't all that different. He still loved his books, still hated people who took advantage of others, and still pretended he didn't absolutely melt into Dick's arms after a long day. No, Jason, you aren't special. You are also just as vulnerable to Dick's amazingness as the rest of the human race. Really, he wasn't all that different. The kid had always been rough around the edges. A little angry, a little angsty, and a little stubborn. It was just now he was 6'2" and built like a brick wall. The two had struck a mutual alliance over the last 2 years. Both united in trying to make sure Dick didn't run himself into the ground. As much as he complained about his older brother, Jason was always the first to inform them of injuries Dick tried to downplay, and take second shift in the infirmary after Wally himself. All of that to say, Wally trusted Jason to not purposefully kill him tonight. If not for his sake, at least for Dick's. Speaking of, "You really planning on proposing to Big Bird?" Jason asked, innocuously. Wally spluttered, hand reaching for his comm unit. The younger vigilante let out a snicker. Relax, none of us are gonna ruin your big moment. Oracle's keeping them on their own line. Wally breathed out a sigh of relief, ignoring the redness in his face. So? Jason prompted, after a moment, his gaze sliding over to Wally's. Yeah, Wally mumbled, not meeting his gaze. Been wanting to for a while. I figured that, with things calming down a little, now would be a good time. Gotta make you all like me first, though. Jason paused at that, expression unreadable. See, that was another difference that Dick didn't account for. Wally knew how to read his boyfriend. He couldn't figure out shit from the rest of his family. We like you, the other man said quietly. Wally couldn't keep the pleased tone out of his voice. Really? Jason rolled his eyes. Don't act like it's some big achievement. If we didn't like you, you wouldn't have stepped foot in the manor. Wally let out a happy hum. Besides, I never had much against you, even before I died. And by the time I came back, you were gone. He said it matter-of-factly, as if he wasn't recounting the most traumatic moments of their lives. Wally let out a strained hum. He couldn't really fault him for the cavalier response. Honestly, it was either that, or feeling irrationally guilty, again for all the grief he'd left behind. The other man smirked when he saw Wally's reaction, eyes glinting. Just be glad you came back on the surface. Oh, right, yeah, Dick mentioned... He trailed off, unsure how to act. It was times like this he really wished he had Cass's skill in reading people. Was Jason saying this as a, ha-ha, I like joking about my own death as a mildly healthy coping mechanism? Or in the, I'm opening up to my future brother-in-law about my vulnerabilities as a bonding activity way? Jason seemed to be thinking the latter, his voice adopting a certain emptiness. Yep, 6 feet under. You ever break solid mahogany with nothing but your nails and a belt buckle, Wally? He shook his head carefully, eyes a little wide from the openness. If he remembered correctly, not even Dick had heard much about Jason's experience right after resurrection. Granted, Wally had never exactly asked, but still. Well, don't. By the time I crawled my way through, I'd lost most of my fingernails. Lost the rest getting through the dirt. Jason got a faraway look in his eyes, and Wally simultaneously resisted the urge to lay his hand on the man's shoulder, and throw up at the imagery. Honestly surprised I lived. Maybe whatever brought me back was just desperate to keep me here, since it took forever to get to the surface. Jason's gaze slid over to Wally, the air stifling. The eyes staring at him were not the vulnerable blues of a man confessing his trauma. They were the poised, smoking green of someone who stared hell in the face and had not been impressed. Suddenly he was doubting if this was a bonding session. Imagine that. Waking up, not knowing your own name, or face, or where you were. Just that deep down, the only way to survive was go straight up, and no matter how much dirt you swallowed or dug through, it never seemed to end. I think I was screaming, Jason said flatly, never breaking eye contact. Wally gulped, wondering if it was too late to run back to Bloodhaven. Jason had seemingly picked the secret third option, villain backstory monologue, potentially followed up with a gruesome murder. Whatever pleasant banter was between them before had vanished, and now Wally was seriously wondering if there was a raid at all, or if he was actually here to get his corpse dumped into the toxic harbor. Jason's expression brightened, but the green didn't leave his eyes. But yeah, that's why when I do kick the bucket again, I'm asking to be cremated. He laughed, a hoarse, bitter thing. Wally felt himself smile nervously, fingers drifting closer to his phone to text Dick. Whether it was to ask for help, or to say his last goodbyes, Wally wasn't sure. And don't worry, Wally. Like I said, I like you, so I'll do you the same courtesy. The look Jason was giving him now was definitely the I'm the last face you'll ever see, and you'll wish you were never born variety, but Wally couldn't seem to make himself move. Just remember, if you ever hurt Dick, I will personally make sure there's not enough left of you to bury. You know, just as a favor. Jason smiled as the words processed in Wally's head. Wait, was that, all of that, just shovel talk? He wailed. Again, Jason cackled, this time lighter. He stood lightly, smacking Wally's shoulder. You're too easy, man. Come on, we should get going. Wally gaped after his retreating back. willing his heart rate to calm down. "Holy fucking shit! I thought I was gonna die!" he shouted at no one in particular. Jason had the nerve to fucking laugh again. By the time he had dragged himself to his feet, and found the roof Jason was crouched on, Wally had gone from deeply betrayed to thoroughly grumpy. "You're an ass, you know that, right?" he griped, squatting down near Red Hood. Jason had his helmet back on now, but Wally had the sense he was smirking at him again. "If you didn't know that already, that's your problem. Now shut up," he hissed. Wally peered across the alleyway through the window into the warehouse. He couldn't see a lot, but there were what looked like a dozen men in suits walking around, each carrying guns. 2 were towards the back of the building, surrounded by at least 10 boxes. "Why did you call me in for this? It doesn't look like much. Do we know what they're moving?" Wally murmured, more than a little confused. Yeah, it was definitely a 2-person job, but did they need a speedster? He could probably have half of them tied up before they even realized they were there. "Just some LSD and cocaine. Iceberg lounge restock. Nothing to worry about." Jason's helmet let out a modulated snicker. "Well, nothing I need to worry about. You'll probably be doing a lot of worrying." Wally turned to him, eyes narrowed. Jason continued. "See, I'm feeling real lazy today. Didn't feel like playing the stealth game. But the fam doesn't like it much when I go guns blazing. That's why you're here." He rose to his feet, looking down at Wally. "You're here to protect me. I don't want to see a single scratch or bruise out of tonight. And I left my grapple at home." He had barely finished speaking before the man took a running leap off the roof, heading straight for the window they were peering through. Wally's eyes widened when he realized what Jason had meant. "Motherfucker!" he yelled, letting the speed force fill him as he rushed off the building and towards the warehouse door. He tore it open, rapidly taking in the scene before him. All the goons were mid-turn, some in shock, some in anger. Glass shards were radiating out from the point Jason had smashed through, arms and head tucked as he braced for landing. Quickly, Wally caught the man, ignoring the way his back buckled as he stumbled at the weight. Jesus Christ, so the muscles weren't all for show. "You're insane!" Jason ignored him, leaping out of his arms. He brushed glass off himself quickly, with a nod. "Nice catch." He reached for his guns, turning towards the nearest goon. Time slowed again as Wally heard a gunshot go off, originating from one of the men on the walkway. All around them, guns were pointed at the pair, faces decisively enraged. Wally kicked off a nearby wall, catching a bullet out of the air and throwing it at the floor as he ran up to the landing. Before the man could fire again, he kicked the gun out of his hands, and the man to the floor. He managed to let out a groan before a second gun cocked across the walkway. Wally grimaced as he took that man down too, clicking the gun's safety on as he dropped it to the floor below. While he was up there, he also knocked the third goon off the balcony. All 3 were left zip-tied to the railing. Down below, Jason had knocked 2 goons, both now groaning on the floor. Completely unbothered, Jason was strutting towards where the 2 men were gathered near the crates. Wally made his way down, slamming one goon into his 2 buddies, letting the 3 of them tumble down the stairs over each other. They didn't get up, groaning in pain. That was 8. 4 left, including the 2 leaders. Speaking of, the larger of the 2 men charged at Jason, head ducked down behind his arms. Jason made no move to impede him, or even point his gun at him. Wally stifled a groan, running towards the grown man he was tasked to babysit. He locked his hands around the thug's arm, following his momentum as he twisted and threw the man back towards the crates. The man stumbled as he went, slamming the other boss to the ground and smashing at least one box. The sound of glass made Wally wince. Jason let out a pleased sound. "Nice. Go deal with the last 2. I'll rope these guys up." Wally saluted, dashing towards where the 2 of them were trying to sneak out the back door. It barely took any time to throw them to the ground and zip-tie their ankles together. He'd just stood up, smiling at his work, when suddenly a bright light erupted from the back of the warehouse. Oh, Bruce was gonna have a field day with this one. It was meant to just be a simple bust. A routine ass-kicking. The perfect opportunity to keep the speedster on his toes. So Jason couldn't mask his surprise when one of the 2 bosses, because go figure, he hadn't gotten kicked out, was drenched in whatever green liquid was in the crates, holding a lighter. Jason didn't know what it was, but it definitely wasn't LSD and crack. Bloody cuts scored across his arms and legs. More of the liquid puddling around his legs. His eyes were vivid. The other boss was passed out on the ground, in only slightly better shape. He had barely taken in the scene when the man threw down the lighter. Its flame licked across whatever was covering the floor rapidly. Oh, fuck. Jason threw his arms in front of his face, but knew that, even if it wouldn't kill him, this was gonna hurt like hell. Somewhere out there, the demon brat was mocking him for getting blown up in a warehouse again. Only, the heat had barely brushed across his wrist before arms squeezed around his chest and wind roared in his ears. His body jolted around for a sec, before stopping, suddenly surrounded by the cool air of Gotham Harbor. Wally was panting in front of him, arms still tight around Jason. The warehouse they were just in shook as yellow flames took over it. Smoke curled out of the windows. He ignored the hammering in his chest as a chunk of the roof caved to the ground. Just his luck. Green, explosion, warehouse. Fucking perfect. Ah, shit. Good save, Speedy. You pass, or whatever, Jason said, forcefully patting the speedster on his shoulder, focusing on the fire. Whatever that shit was, it definitely wasn't good. He'd just have to tell Barbie to get them a sample to figure out what was actually going on here tonight, because it definitely wasn't routine penguin restock. Against him, Wally seemed to stumble. "Thanks," he said through gritted teeth, letting out a pained breath. Jason's ears twitched at the sound, catching the redhead against him. You okay, man?" he asked, nervously, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. Wally raised his head to meet his eyes. They were unfocused, and he seemed to be struggling to keep them open. "I don't think so," he mumbled. Suddenly, he went limp in Jason's arms, eyes rolling back in his head. "Shit, fuck, what?" He cut himself off when he finally saw the speedster's back. Glittering shards were embedded all across it, like a horrible porcupine. Some were still dripping with whatever had been unleashed into the air. "Oh, Dickie's gonna kill me." "Jason!" The furious voice of Dick Grayson echoed up from the stairwell to the Batcave. Running footsteps followed after. "Shit, fuck," the man in question said, quickly turning off the stove and lifting the pan away from it. The tangy sauce bubbled unhappily. This might take a while. No reason to ruin dinner, too. He just set it down when the clock slammed open and the enraged face of Dick Grayson appeared in the doorway. "I put my boyfriend in your safe, capable hands for one night, Jay. Why did you blow him up?" Dick gesticulated wildly, looking like he was barely holding himself back from violently shaking Jason. Despite having hours to prepare an appropriate response, Jason said the first thing that came to mind. "Okay, in my defense, I didn't know the shit was flammable." Dick's eye twitched dangerously, and Jason winced. Okay, yeah, even he could imagine B's lecture at that defense. "Let me rephrase. It was meant to just be a simple job for Penguin, some LSD and crack and shit. I don't know where the fear toxin came from, and I sure as hell don't know why it blew up. I swear." His brother's fists clenched and unclenched as he glowered at Jason. "Do you want to see Barbie's report?" he offered, quickly pulling out his phone and scrolling to the file. He offered it to Dick. "She thinks we just stumbled on some underground shit Crane's doing. Something meant to target metas, I don't know." Thankfully, his brother took it with little more than a scowl, leaning against the counter to read it. Jason took a few steps back, reaching back for his cooking, now that Dick wasn't actively on the warpath. He stirred the sauce gently, letting it warm back up, before adding the half-cooked chicken breast back in. The 4 pieces of meat simmered happily, the smell of lemon filling the kitchen. Guilt gnawed at his gut. Whatever shit Crane was cooking up, it definitely wasn't good news for metas. Whether it was in response to Duke, or Wally showing up more often in Gotham, or just scarecrow villainy in general, that stuff was brutal. Wally barely got any in his system, and it was still enough to knock him out. That amount of glass should have been nothing for a speedster. But combined with suddenly losing his enhanced healing, and whatever effects the stuff had when directly in the bloodstream, well, it wasn't surprising he conked out. Alfred said there wasn't really anything to worry about. A few bandages, an IV for good measure, and just letting it flush out of his system should be enough. But still, it wasn't long before he got sick of the silence. "How's he doing?" he forced himself to ask, shame weighing in his shoulders. His brother sighed. When he spoke, it was quiet with worry. It was better than angry, at least. "He should be fine. Woke up a little bit when I got there. Whatever sedative is in his system is keeping him down. But at least he's not hurting. I was gonna spend the night here, in case he wakes up again." "I just meant to make him panic a little," Jason explained, voice quieter than he meant it to be. "Make sure he knew how to be on edge and have your back and shit. I swear I thought the most dangerous thing in the place was guns." The last part came out as a mumble, his back to his brother. Jason let out a breath through his nose, sounding light. "That's why you did this?" he asked, voice bordering on amused. Jason felt himself shrug, ignoring the way his ears turned pink. If Dick actually wanted him to admit to giving a shit about his well-being, well, it'd take more than a light pincushioning of Wally to do that. "Not even a fair comparison. I'm not that reckless," Dick pouted. "You are," Jason insisted automatically. Over his shoulder, Dick childishly blew a raspberry. Jason smiled. He poked the chicken, testing its firmness. "So, what you makin'?" Dick asked, hooking his chin over Jason's shoulder. He resisted the urge to shrug him off. "Chicken piccata." "You mean the dish Wally wouldn't stop raving about last month?" This time, Jason's face definitely went red. "Aw, you do care," Dick said smugly. "Shut up." Jason shoved his idiot brother's face away with his palm, with no real force. Dick let out a petty laugh as the two settled into a comfortable silence. "I wouldn't actually hurt him, you know. Not purposefully." Jason kept his gaze on the food, refusing to meet his brother's gaze. If there was any ounce of skepticism in there, he didn't want to see it. "I know, little wing," Dick said softly, leaning into Jason. "I didn't mean to imply that you would. You aren't that kind of guy." "I was," he bit back bitterly, letting the tension leave his shoulders. I know, just making sure." He tried to sound indifferent, but he couldn't play it off quite right. Dick didn't comment. After a beat, Dick asked, "You'll actually watch his back from now on?" "Of course, Dick face. Can't let my future brother-in-law die," Jason said with a snort. Dick flinched, eyes going wide. A moment later, Jason realized what he'd just said. Fuck, now Wally's gonna kill me. He was trying to quickly think of a way to clear his ass when Dick spoke. "How do you know about that?" he asked, alarmed. Now it was Jason's turn to be confused. He locked eyes with Dick before it clicked. "Holy shit, are you actually—" "Shh!" Dick said, violently waving his hands in front of Jason's face. "Do you think he'll say yes?" He had to hold himself back from laughing in his brother's face. "Are you kidding? He just blew himself up because he thought it'd make me like him. Guy's crazy about you," he declared, then added, "and in general." Dick let out a relieved breath. "I know. Part of me's glad you guys are doing this. I really want you all to get along." "Oh, yeah, we get along fine. The others like him too. This is just for tradition." Dick made a face. "Is it also tradition to blow up?" Jason interrupted him, tutting while waving his hand at Dick. "Shut up. Now, are you gonna help me bring this down?" A warm hand was rocking his shoulder, its voice coming slowly into focus. "Walls? Babe? Wake up. Jason made food." Wally did as he was ordered, prying his sleepy eyes open and smiling dopily up at his boyfriend. "Hi." Dick smiled, helping him sit up in the medical cot. "Hi. You feeling okay?" He nodded, wincing at the ache that triggered in his head. "Yeah, kinda sleepy." He sniffed the air. Something smelled delicious. Right, Jay made food. His gaze caught on the other man in the small room. Jason was standing awkwardly near the door, hands full of 2 plates, one significantly bigger than the other. He was eyeing Wally warily. like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. Deciding he didn't feel like being an adult, Wally smiled and made grabby hands for the food. The move worked. Jason let out a snort and passed him the larger plate. There was a small smile on his lips. Before him was a beautiful pile of linguine lemony sauce, glistening with steaming chunks of chicken. Green capers and parsley decorated the dish. Wally enjoyed the delicious smell of chicken piccata, suddenly feeling very awake. Dick let out a giggle at this reaction, startling when Jason poked the other plate at him. That's for me? Duh, dumbass, Jason said exasperatedly. There was extra. The two boyfriends smiled knowingly. Jason didn't do extra. Dick gladly accepted his share of the dish, settling onto the chair beside Wally's cot, while Jason plopped himself in the corner. They ate happily, Dick occasionally jabbing noodles or bites of chicken for Jason to eat too. Yeah, despite the warm food, Wally couldn't help the way his stomach seemed to twist. His ears kept twitching, and he felt the urge to glance around the room. Obviously, there was nothing to find. It was the Batcave, whose security could put the Pentagon to shame. But something in him was buzzing, anxiety pooling in his gut. Dick nudged him gently, noticing his stress. Sorry. Food's great, Jason. I don't know, I just feel really anxious right now. Jason nodded. That's probably the fear toxin. You didn't get hit with much, but that stuff's sticking to metagenes like glue. Wally swallowed in relief. At least he wasn't going crazy. Dick rubbed his arm sympathetically, leaning up to peck Wally on the cheek. When Wally turned to him, Dick continued, this time on the lips. What are you doing? Wally asked, laughing as Dick peppered kisses along his face. Distracting you, he replied, simply. Jason appeared, grabbing the two almost empty dishes off the bed. Yeah, I'm out. Have fun, you two. I ain't fixing your stitches, Speedy. The man retreated right as Dick pushed himself onto the cot, snuggling Wally close. You're a dork, Wally mumbled, enveloped against his boyfriend's chest. Yeah. Dick kissed his temple. Is it working? Instead of responding, he simply went limp, letting Dick maneuver his legs into his lap, face against his collar. It was very hard to be anxious, surrounded by Dick's warmth. Dick kissed him once more, this time in his hair. I got you, Walls. Just like old times. You got my back, I got yours. If you're going, I'm going, Wally murmured in response, suddenly feeling sleepy again. Dick's chest rumbled softly. Exactly. Thanks for saving Jay. No problem, Rob. Love you. Love you too, KF. Wally slipped back into darkness, his heart beating warmly against Dick's. Notes. Help, this was the first part I wrote, and it hit almost 6K. I did not intend this. Help. I thought this fic would be shorter than the prequel. I have realized I was wrong. Anyway, Protective Jay gives me life. He's so blorbo. Can I keep him? If this bat fam fixation keeps up, expect more of him. Also, yes, I do think Jay would be dramatic enough to use his trauma as fuel for fucking with people. Is it a healthy coping mechanism? TM? I don't know. I'm gonna go turn down the fan. Now you may be thinking, why don't you just turn off the fan, because you said you were cold. And to that I say, but it makes noise. And it needs to stay there, or I will lose my goddamn mind. Yes, it's a skull. Yes, it's a skull. Jesus Christ. I like Wally West being short, specifically because I'm short, and I'm a runner. I've kicked enough tall people in the shins to tell you... Anyway. Hi. Hello. I'm so sorry, my lap is already taken up by a plush dinosaur. It's weighted. The cat's name is not Christ, for the record. Hello, little lady. Fuck off, please. Haven't seen Bloodhaven in a while. Nope, I have to keep up this thing. Fuck. You can make all the comments you want about Bruce having a bunch of child soldiers. Alfred is 100% worse, because not only does he look at Bruce's collection of children and go, you know, you could spend more time around them, but I see nothing wrong with a bunch of child soldiers. and then you turn it to his fucking collection of child soldiers. They're not even trained. They have no armor. And he's like, oh, it's fine. If you don't know what I'm talking about We Are Robin. Where, to the spoiler, I guess, where fucking Alfred runs We Are Robin, which is a vigilante group who is not trained, who wears no armor, and is just, a collection of teenagers. In the first few chapters, one of the kids gets fucking killed. I'm sure he had great intentions, but at least Bruce gave his child soldiers training, okay? He wouldn't lie to Dick on his behalf. To any of the family, really. That is a bold-faced lie. The Jason Todd impregnator. Sorry, is Dick sitting in the center of the sofa? What kind of psychopath sits by themselves in the middle of the sofa? I do the same thing. I don't think it's healthy, but I do the same thing. We're pointed towards my window today, which could mean that while recording this, I can look out and see people walking their dogs. I've just realized someone can look out at me and see the facial expressions I make when I read. Which might be the worst thing ever. I think she smells it and she smells poison. I don't have a lot of Appalachian-isms. I grew up listening to audiobooks, so I speak very properly compared to most of the people I interact with. I learned recently that my one Appalachianism, waspers. I don't call them wasps, they're waspers. I didn't realize this wasn't normal until I was talking with my friend. It's a fucking wasper, what are you talking about, man? The people in the apartment above mine are moving around, and I can hear them. I'm assuming they just got home from work. Sorry, I've been playing with a needle